The guns were still warm. The smoke had not yet cleared from the skies over Tehran and the Persian Gulf when the announcement came through, cutting across every wire service and military communication channel at once. A ceasefire. 2 weeks, and already both sides were telling two very different stories about who had won. The conflict had been burning for more than 5 weeks. It began on February 28, 2026, when U.S. and Israeli forces launched nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours, targeting Iranian missiles, air defenses, military infrastructure, and the Iranian leadership itself. What followed was not a quick surgical operation. It was a full theater war. The opening strikes killed Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. That single act triggered a torrent of hundreds of retaliatory missiles and thousands of drones from Iran launched across the entire region. The Middle East had not seen anything like it in decades. The conflict left enormous damage. Thousands were killed in Iran and Lebanon. Dozens died in Israel and in the Gulf Arab states. More than 1/6 of Lebanon's population was displaced, and through it all, one choke point became the center of the world's anxiety. The Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which a fifth of the world's oil passes during peacetime, became Iran's most powerful weapon. Tehran closed it. The moment it did, fuel prices surged across Asia. Financial markets trembled. The global economy felt the pressure within days. The war's economic impact was described as the world's largest supply disruption since the 1970s energy crisis, bringing surges in oil and gas prices, wide disruptions in aviation and tourism, and volatility in financial markets. On the ground and in the air, the campaign was relentless. The U.S. and Israel battered Iran with attacks targeting its military capabilities, its leadership, and its nuclear program. Iran responded with a stream of strikes on Israel and Gulf Arab neighbors, causing regional chaos and outsized economic and political shock. The war had spread beyond Iran's borders long before any diplomat reached for a phone. Then came Tuesday night, April 7, 2026. A deadline had been set. Everyone in the region knew it. Trump had warned that a whole civilization will die tonight if Iran did not comply. Those words sat over the region like a storm cloud. Military planners on all sides were watching the clock. Strike packages were reportedly ready. The targets had already been selected, among them Iranian bridges, power plants, and civilian infrastructure. The world held its breath. Late Tuesday, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif urged Trump to extend his deadline by 2 weeks to allow diplomacy to advance. In a post on X, Sharif also asked Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz for 2 weeks. It was a last-minute diplomatic intervention from a nation that had positioned itself carefully throughout this war, not as a combatant, but as a channel between enemies. Before the deadline passed, airstrikes had already hit 2 bridges and a train station, and the U.S. struck military infrastructure on Karg Island, a key hub for Iranian oil production. These were not warning shots. They were messages delivered in fire and metal, signals of what total escalation would look like. Then the announcement came. Trump wrote on Truth Social, "Based on conversations with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir of Pakistan, and wherein they requested that I hold off the destructive force being sent tonight to Iran, and subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran, agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks." He added that the United States had already met and exceeded its military objectives and was far along in reaching a broader agreement with Tehran. He pointed to a 10-point proposal from Iran, calling it a workable basis for negotiation, and said almost all points of past contention had been agreed to between the two nations. Within the hour, Tehran responded. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi confirmed Iran's acceptance and said Iran would allow safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz for the 2-week period via coordination with Iran's armed forces. Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued its own formal statement. The ceasefire was in effect. Israel also agreed to the terms, according to a White House official. Pakistan's Prime Minister Sharif said the ceasefire would also extend to Lebanon, covering the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu clarified that Israel's commitment applied specifically to Iran and that the Lebanon theater was a separate matter. But even as the diplomatic language was being exchanged, missile alerts sounded in the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait in the early hours of Wednesday, hinting at the chaos surrounding the diplomatic moves. Throughout the war, Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard had called the shots in all decisions. Individual commanders had made decisions on what to strike and when, with the nation's political leadership sidelined. Whether they agreed to stop shooting remained in question. In many Middle East conflicts, combatants launch last-minute strikes simply to claim they did not flinch first. Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued a statement saying this ceasefire did not signify the termination of the war. Our hands remain upon the trigger, it read, and should the slightest error be committed by the enemy, it shall be met with full force. That was not the language of surrender. That was the language of a force that believed or needed its people to believe that it had not been defeated, and Tehran moved quickly to shape that narrative. Iranian media claimed that the truce had been imposed on the enemy after 4 waves of attacks on Israeli-occupied territories. Iran's National Security Council declared that it had shattered the enemy's primary strategic goal. The government sought to convey its resilience, highlighting societal cohesion and civilian solidarity. The reality on the battlefield told a more complex story. Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium remained buried at enrichment sites. The program had been one of the main issues cited by both Israel and the U.S. going into the war. Israeli officials were not satisfied. They were skeptical and believed the apparent breakthrough could unravel and lead to further escalation if Iran did not quickly open the Strait of Hormuz. Inside Israeli government circles, the feeling was that more could have been achieved. The job, in their view, was not done. Iran's demands going forward were sweeping. Tehran's conditions for ending the war include control of the strait, the withdrawal of U.S. combat forces from the region, the lifting of sanctions, and the release of its frozen assets, demands that indicate an effort to remake the geopolitical order in the Middle East and the global oil trade. These were not the demands of a nation that had accepted defeat. They were the demands of a nation playing for time. The U.S. and Iran are expected to hold peace talks in Islamabad beginning Friday, April 10th, with Vice President Vance likely to lead the American delegation. The next 2 weeks will determine whether this ceasefire becomes something permanent or merely a pause before the next round. Financial markets reacted with instant relief to the news. S&P 500 futures rose more than 1%, while oil futures quickly sank about 6%. The world's economies exhaled, but the region had not yet exhaled. Missile alerts were still sounding, commanders were still watching their screens. The ceasefire existed on paper. Whether it would hold in the air, on the water, and in the tunnels and command posts of the Revolutionary Guard was a different question entirely. What is clear is this: a war that shook the foundations of the Middle East has paused, at least for now. By April 8, 2026, both nations had indicated the ceasefire is temporary and not a cessation of hostilities. The weapons have gone quiet, the diplomats have taken the field, and 2 nations, each insisting it emerged stronger, are now sitting across a table to decide what comes next. The ceasefire is 2 weeks old. The war is not over,